thank you very much to the organizers, the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, for this invitation to speak today. I should say that I'm more of I tend to work more on India's foreign policy, security policy, and the Indo-Pacific more broadly, rather than on maritime security. But maritime security has become so salient and so important to Australia and also to Australia's relationships across the region that I think all of us who have any kind of interest in the Indo-Pacific broadly have been engaged in this wider subject of maritime security. And I have been involved as well in a project that's been sponsored by the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, which we call Blue Security, which has been producing a whole series of papers about how to improve maritime security, very broadly conceived across this region. So what I thought I would do is perhaps just offer some comments on Australia's approach to maritime security as it's evolving. It's a very broad subject, of course, but I thought I would kind of give some inputs on this particular topic that might chime with some of the other comments that will be made by others across this session. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why maritime security matters to Australia, what Australia is doing, and what more it might be doing, and what it might not be doing that it should be doing indeed as well. So maritime security, as I've already suggested, is hugely important to Australia. Really, partly because of Australia's maritime real estate, if you like. Australia has the third largest exclusive economic zone in the world. It's about 10 million or so square kilometres. That's actually larger than the landmass of Australia. It's about 7.7 million square kilometres. It has the largest search and rescue zone in the world at about 53 or so million square kilometres, which is a very large chunk of the globe. And Australia is dependent, obviously, on maritime trade. It's dependent on maritime trade for its energy resources in particular, but also for our exports of iron ore, coal, and other kinds of commodities that we produce in quantities, and of course sell across the Indo-Pacific region, trade into that region. Australia is also, of course, interested in a whole range of other maritime challenges. So in the last 20, 30 years or so, a variety of transnational crime issues across this region, including people smuggling, drug trafficking. We've just had a case of some quite sophisticated submarines coming across the Pacific, trying to deliver cocaine to our shores on the east coast of Australia. We're also concerned, obviously, with piracy, with illegal and unregulated fishing as well, and with a range of other transnational crime challenges in this space. And two, we are concerned, obviously, with climate, but I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. The major strategic challenge that has pushed maritime security back onto the agenda, however, of course, is China, which has already been hinted at in the first presentation. So China's increasingly muscular presence across the Indo-Pacific, its expanding footprint, not just in terms of its military, it's also its coast guard, its fishing fleets, its maritime militia, and so on, is a concern to Australia. Its activities in terms of mapping the seabed, in terms of prospecting for seabed mining, for example, its potential impact on the environment, all of those things are of concern to Australia. Australia is interested too in the sea lanes communication across this region, and since 2020, increasingly concerned about the prospects of economic coercion by China of Australia, affecting us in a range of different ways. And we've already experienced a degree of coercion in terms of trade sanctions, and we could look forward to other kinds of coercion in the future as well, in terms of the disruption of our trade or of our energy supplies, or indeed now, of course, again, which was hinted in the first presentation too, of data flows, seabed cables, and so on and so forth. We've already seen some disruption to seabed cables in the South China Sea, not clearly attributed to any particular actor, but we've already seen some disruption in that area. And then, of course, we've seen natural disasters impacting connectivity, famously, of course, in Tonga a few years ago out in the Pacific as well. So we have a sense of what the impact of all of that could be. Australia is, of course, interested too in the sovereignty claims that China has advanced, particularly the claims in the South China Sea, which it began to advance with some energy after 2009. So these challenges have forced Australia to focus much more on its maritime security, in particular on the harder edged areas of maritime security over the last decade and a half or so. And that's meant that since we had a defense white paper in 2009 as well, which refocused a lot of our attention and energy onto our Navy again. And there was consciousness then that our Navy was too small, too limited, at around 50 or so ships that are, we don't have a proper Coast Guard, but we do have a Maritime Border Command and a range of vessels and capabilities in that area. But the connections between the various different departments and agencies in that particular space are complicated. We then are upgrading our capabilities, but those capabilities are being upgraded relatively slowly. So a lot of focus is on the investments in nuclear propelled submarines and other kinds of advanced technologies, but arguably important too are the offshore patrol vessels that we're acquiring, the new frigates that we're acquiring in the early 2030s from the UK. The new general purpose frigates will hopefully will be ordered pretty soon, up to 11 of those, again, arriving in the early 2030s. The optionally crewed vessels, which are going to be ordered at some point in the next few years, as well as a range of other sort of smaller capabilities that Australia is trying to add into the mix. So a huge number of challenges that Australia has got here, and our capabilities are limited. Beyond this, of course, Australia has been extremely active and energetic in defense diplomacy across the region, both in Southeast Asia and in the Pacific in particular, but also with India with a focus on the Bay of Bengal and that space in the Indian Ocean region, and working much more carefully and deeply with allies and partners across this whole region on a range of different things, including interoperability, including working on some high-end capabilities like anti-submarine warfare, but also, of course, working on maritime domain awareness as well. And of course, we can't forget the fact that Australia has been doing a lot of work in capacity building and training across the region with various different bodies involved in that, from working with regional countries on issues of maritime law and trying to improve awareness and understanding of those kinds of challenges, right the way through to some of the technical training as well. So let me just highlight a few things that Australia has been doing, and then I'll try and, just in the last minute I've got left, speak to some of the critiques of Australia's approach at the moment. So Australia is right across the Indo-Pacific engaged in various different programs. It's involved, and perhaps I think Tess may speak to this as well, in the Pacific Maritime Security Program, in trying to provide Pacific nations with boats, with maintenance and sustainment for those boats, training advisors, providing air surveillance, improving communications, all sorts of things that are really important to allowing those Pacific countries to be able to regulate fishing in their areas and to regulate other kinds of activities in their very extensive EEZs as well. Australia is involved too, of course, in the Indo-Pacific Partnership, Maritime Domain Awareness, the provision of data and information across this area. And it's involved, it's just launched a new maritime partnership scheme in Southeast Asia. It was announced just earlier on this year, that is going to assist Southeast Asian states with mapping. It's going to get the Australian Border Force and other agencies to talk to their counterparts more across Southeast Asia and provide advice, information, best practice, a whole range of things like that. But it also contains a range of initiatives concerning things like environmental protection, particularly around reefs and so on. So again, taking a kind of holistic approach to this maritime security issue. And last but not least, of course, Australia is closely involved in the Australia-India-Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, partnership as well, which could well prove to be quite an important initiative in that space. Now, what are the persistent critiques of Australia here? Well, there are three, really. I've already spoken to the question of capability. We have very limited capabilities just in terms of ships and boats. but we also have limited capabilities in terms of people. Our workforce challenges are in some ways just as important as our equipment challenges. Also, one of the other persistent critiques is that we lack an overarching strategy. We have no one single national security strategy. We have no one single maritime security strategy either. And that means that in principle, at least, there's not enough coordination across the 25 or so federal agencies and departments that have some responsibility over maritime security in Australia. And the last thing is that arguably we're moving too slowly on some things that are quite important, things that I haven't mentioned, for example, like our sovereign merchant fleet, something that was proposed several years ago. We're only at a pilot stage now, and we're only looking at acquiring 12 ships and fitting them out, getting them working and so on as well. And the last thing that I should mention too, and I suspect that others might pick this up too as well, is that we're neglecting the climate dimension to all of these various different things. So I'm probably stopped there. I think I've used up my time. And again, I'm very grateful to the organizers for being involved in this event today. Thank you.